Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Young-Kyo Kim. U.S. President Joe Biden and South Korean President Moon Jae-in had the first phone call since President Biden's inauguration, agreeing to closely coordinate on North Korea. The two leaders stressed the need to strengthen the U.S.-South Korea alliance, and at the same time, they share the view the U.S., South Korea, Japan trilateral security partnership is important. Today, we'll discuss these and more. Joining us is Keith Luse, Executive Director of the National Committee on North Korea. Previously, Mr. Luse was the Senior East Asia Policy Advisor for late Senator Richard Lugar at the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee for 10 years, from 2003 until 2013. Scott Snyder also joins us today. He's Director of the Program on U.S.-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of the South Korean foreign policy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
First of all, President Joe Biden spoke on the phone with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. According to the White House, the two leaders agreed to closely coordinate on North Korea. The Biden administration keeps emphasizing the importance of the coordination on the North Korean issues. Mr. Luse, what kind of coordination does the U.S. need to seek right now?
Well, thank you for that question. It certainly is central to the U.S. ROK relationship. But before answers can be forthcoming, it will be necessary for the Biden administration to conduct a very thorough policy review, not only regarding North Korea, but South Korea as well. What is the alliance? How is the alliance defined? Does the ROK and the U.S. agree on the definition of alliance? The Biden administration really has an opportunity to do a deeper dig than usual in terms of a review of the past U.S. DPRK, U.S. ROK relationships. And I think that will be necessary. It's ongoing. It will probably take some time. But to truly answer your question, that policy review must first occur.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Luse, just to follow up on what you said. You emphasized that the Biden administration need to find out whether the South Korea and U.S. agrees on the definition of the alliance. What is the assessment? Do you think the two countries they need to talk about it?
I think that in any relationship, whether it be individuals, one to another, or countries, or leaders between countries, too often assumptions are made. Assumptions based upon the past. I think it would be unfortunate if either the ROK or the U.S. Enter into this alliance without actually testing some of those assumptions and making certain that there is clear understanding about each other's position.
Right. Mr. Snyder, what about you? Is there any issue the Biden team trying to improve by stressing the close coordination on the North Korean issues?
Well, I think one way to look at this is that it's an expression of intent to work together, and the underlying assumption that I think that Keith may be referring to that needs to be affirmed is that we actually have the same strategic objectives vis-a-vis North Korea. And I think that is likely to be the case. But another complicating factor that is relatively new in terms of alliance coordination is that the Biden administration's policy toward Asia is very much going to be framed with a focus on China. And so that means that there's a prioritization challenge because South Korea is focused on North Korea. The U.S. May be more focused on China as a priority. And so it's going to be necessary for the U.S. and South Korea to organize together the priority and scope of alliance cooperation if the alliance is truly going to be effective in meeting these challenges.
Mm-hmm. Congressional Research Service released its latest report and said bilateral difficulties between the U.S. and South Korea could surface over the North Korean policy. Do you think this statement reflects some of the concerns in Washington?
Well, I think that what the Congressional Research Service report was really pointing to is that there are some gaps in approach between the U.S. and South Korea that are emerging. One factor is timetable. The Moon administration has only a year left in office, a little bit more than a year, while the Biden administration is planning for almost 4 years ahead. Another is the preferences in terms of the mix of sanctions and incentives. And I think that it's apparent at this point that the Moon administration is advocating for a softer approach toward North Korea that emphasizes early engagement. And then I think another issue that has emerged is a concern in some parts of Washington about a propensity for the Moon administration to pursue appeasement toward North Korea, particularly in response to public statements by Kim Yo-jong. And so all of those issues are issues that have to be dealt with and coordinated and prioritized as part of any policy review. And it's important that the Biden administration has expressed an intent to engage South Korea as part of that review, but I'm not sure that it's going to be easy. And then one other factor I think is important to consider, and that is that the Biden administration, as it pursues its policy review, also has to grapple with possible differences of opinion within its team on how to deal with North Korea. And so that may be a factor that slows things down a little bit, but it's also an essential factor if there's going to be a coherent and effective policy toward North Korea going forward.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken said in a recent interview with NBC that the North Korean nuclear issue is the problem that has gotten worse over time across administrations. He said the U.S. will look at ways to move forward North Korea's denuclearization and see whether additional sanctions or diplomatic incentives are needed. Mr. Luse, what do you think he meant by diplomatic incentives?
Well, again, I can't speak for the Secretary. They have a policy review underway. However, I would note that there are a number of key players now in place in the Biden administration who worked on or were familiar with North Korea during the Obama administration. I suspect that lessons learned from that experience will be applied today. The Obama administration applied a policy of strategic patience to North Korea, but only really in the context of the nuclear program. The Obama administration applied strategic pressure to North Korea in the context of human rights, designating Kim Jong-un as personally responsible for crimes against humanity, pursuing a commission of inquiry at the UN, etc. This is not patience, this is pressure. Now that pressure did result in North Korea cutting off contact with the United States in terms of talks for the duration of the Obama term. So the Biden people know this. So they have the challenge on one hand of working to denuclearize North Korea in collaboration with the ROK, with China, with Japan, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, the Congress of the United States will make certain that the human rights issues in North Korea are addressed. Well, President Biden knows this. President Biden was in the Senate when the North Korea Human Rights Act was originally passed. He was part of that. And so this is a very complex challenge. And fortunately, the people in place now know these issues, they know the past, but more than ever before, they have the responsibility now of coming up with some innovative approaches.
Mr. Snyder, what are the options for the diplomatic incentives, you think?
And I think that one that might loom over the Biden administration team that could also be relevant is the failed Leap Day agreement, which ended up unraveling because North Korea decided it wanted to continue long-range missile tests. And so that means that there's going to be some caution. But if I were to suggest the right approach in terms of grappling with the current situation. What I would focus on is some kind of initiative designed to provide evidence that the Biden administration does not have a reflexive and internal hostile policy toward North Korea. This can be a way of unlocking and providing a foundation for a dialogue and for potential cooperation in some area with North Korea, recognizing that there's a very comprehensive agenda and very deep history of mistrust. So in terms of just getting the ball rolling and getting started, I think that would probably be the best place to start.
Mm-hmm. Then, Mr. Luse, within the U.S. government and within the U.S. legislature, providing humanitarian assistance to North Korea, can this be discussed separately from the overall talks with North Korea?
Well, hopefully the humanitarian assistance issue will be discussed separately. We should not be holding humanitarian assistance hostage to other policies related to North Korea. But you know, I must say that at the moment, the world faces this pandemic crisis. North Korea faces a pandemic crisis, an emergency within that country. At the end of the day, it is a personal opinion that more North Koreans may eventually die as a result of North Korea's response to the pandemic through its closing the borders, through extreme quarantine measures and so on. More North Koreans may die as a result of disruptions within society versus those who actually die from COVID-19. But here again, we talk about humanitarian assistance. It's unlikely in the foreseeable future that North Korea will allow any humanitarian assistance into the country. North Korea is not allowing the United Nations. North Korea is not allowing NGOs. North Korea is not allowing foreign embassies to replace their personnel as they depart North Korea. Today, you have perhaps 2 UN personnel on the ground in North Korea, compared to 50 to 60 in the past. You have many Western embassies, if not all, largely abandoned in terms of the expats who are there. It seems to me that the North Korean response to COVID-19 may have gone beyond the issues related to sound science.
And as you said, Mr. Luse, North Korea has been refusing to accept any humanitarian assistance from the outside world despite its struggles with the pandemic. Meanwhile, North Korea is expected to receive nearly 2 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines by the first half of this year, according to COVAX, an international health group. Do you think this could serve as a momentum to change the circumstances?
I'm very skeptical in that regard. As an American, when I speak of vaccine diplomacy, for example, the North Koreans view that phrase vaccine diplomacy as vaccine leveraging. The North Koreans, during the pandemic, have refused any U.S. NGO assistance. The North Koreans did not respond, as far as I know, to the Trump administration offer of assistance. Now, in part, this is due to residue from the Hanoi summit, unhappiness on the part of the North Koreans. But there's also this concern in the North that the United States or other countries might somehow attempt to leverage assistance to get them back to the bargaining table. They're not willing to accept that. They're not willing to go down that road. Now, you're correct that because North Korea has been in contact with Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, arrangements have been made now to provide vaccines to North Korea for COVID-19, which might in fact inoculate up to 3 to 4% of the North Korean population. And as far as Gavi is concerned and COVAX, this actually could occur by the end of March. But this is not an automatic reality. For this to occur, it's my understanding North Korea will need to sign a letter of agreement, a legal document with the manufacturer of the vaccine. For this to work, North Korea will have to allow international workers into the country to monitor, etc. I suspect it's very possible at the end of the day, this may be a stretch too far for North Korea. So I won't be surprised eventually if North Korea turns to China or Russia, both of which are developing or have developed vaccines, which may be approved by WHO. Once that occurs, I will not be surprised if North Korea turns to China or Russia and says, please come in, please help us. Because with China and Russia, the North Koreans may not have as much concern about foreign eyes, about looking at what's going on around the country.
Mr. Snyder, I also want to know what you think about this issue. Do you think providing vaccines will help North Korea reopen the borders and eventually lead to what Blinken said, diplomatic incentives?
Well, I generally agree with what Keith has had to say on the likely North Korean response. And in fact, with regards to the broader challenge of the policy review, one of the biggest issues is that North Korea gets a vote. And this is a moment where North Korea is focusing on retrenchment, not outreach. Just this past week, we've seen the North Koreans reiterate a focus on self-reliance under the strategic control of the state. And so that is a kind of indirect signal that they're looking inward rather than outward. But the vaccines are an opportunity for the regime to turn that around and to begin to re-engage in some ways with the outside world. Another very important decision that the North Koreans have to make is whether or not they're going to continue to pursue self-restraint with regards to testing of missiles or nuclear devices. In fact, North Korea could also even signal a desire for engagement by taking it a step further, as they did in 2018, and taking unilateral steps to hint at dismantlement of some of those capabilities. But that's not the environment that we currently seem to be facing. It's the opposite of the direction that the North Koreans seem to indicate that they are wanting to go so far in 2021.
Mr. Snyder, during the Obama administration, the U.S. government sporadically provided humanitarian aid to North Korea, for example, in 2011 and 2017, in order to help then typhoon hit North Korea. Do you think something similar can be done?
Well, it might be done, but as Keith has been suggesting, humanitarian aid is most likely to be effective if dealt with separately from the hard security issues in the relationship. I don't think that they should be linked because I don't think that the North Koreans, as Keith said, I don't think that the North Koreans appreciate humanitarian aid being used for political leverage. And so instead, I think what we really need to do is to sit down and think hard about the political and security relationship between the two countries and look at ways of framing and beginning a process that would stimulate quid pro quos that can reduce regional tensions and reduce tensions in the political relationship between the U.S. and North Korea. Humanitarian aid might be a way of starting that, but I think it's very important to avoid efforts at linkage with the political process.
Meanwhile, in his address at the State Department, President Biden committed to rebuilding U.S. alliances and emphasized that the diplomacy is back at the center of the U.S. foreign policy. He also signaled the U.S. will engage diplomatically with adversaries. And we'll have to keep an eye on what this could mean for the Biden team's North Korean policy going forward. Mr. Luse and Mr. Snyder, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Youngyo.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.